Howdy, I'm John Goodling, and this is episode 5 of my boat project with my brother. So today's episode is on safety and controls. So, the next thing that we needed to do, since we have a hull, an engine, and the impeller, or the jet drive installed, is we needed to install the roll cage. The roll cage is where all of our seats, harnesses, and a lot of our control systems are based off of. Now, the regulation requires 11 gauge, 1.5 inch diameter DOM tubing. So that's what we got. We got a bunch of it, and these two main hoops have to form an A frame, which your entire body above the hull is inside of. So we took some measurements. I drew it up on CAD, and you can see that from the thumbnails and the other pictures. And we started welding it. We had to bend it into shape, and these main hoops had to be a single continuous piece, so we had to bend them in place. And there has to be 6 points of contact, each with either a 5/8 inch grade 8 bolt or two half-inch grade 8 bolts. You can go down to lower sizes, but those are the two that we use. Is like you can use four 5/16 bolts. But that's a lot of holes to drill and a lot of things to line up. We just used one in each one big bolt in each corner, and then up in the front we used two bolts, half-inch. So we started welding it together. We made some measurements, put it together, and threw it in the boat. Now we had to bend and pull it, and move it, and then secure it and weld it back so that it stayed in place. So there was a lot of putting it in and taking it out. And you can see that we put a gusset in these back corners, and we just drilled a 5/8 hole in it so that we could attach it to the hull right in front of the fuel tanks. And then these just attached to a flange on the bottom that we built. Now, the purpose of these cross members is to mount our seats. And we got some Kirky seats. These are 81 series Kirky seats. They're racing seats, very lightweight, all aluminum, very comfortable. I had them custom sized for 14-inch hips, which is what me and Will have, with a little bit of wiggle room. The racing also requires Schnell standard helmets. You don't have to go full face, but that's what I decided because I don't want anything hitting my face. And there's also a Hans device underneath here, which is to prevent your neck from sliding forward and causing a basal skull fracture if you ever hit anything really hard. So our necks are locked in. They can't move up, down, left, or right really, and our heads are protected because roll cages are actually very dangerous because you have a piece of metal that will hit your head if you bounce around too much. The race also requires that the seat have, I think they're called cheek pieces, but they have to go out beyond your chin when you're already strapped in. We also are required to have 5 or 6 point safety harnesses. I don't have any pictures here, but they're there. We actually haven't worn them yet because we were more afraid of the boat sinking, and we didn't want to be strapped into it or unconscious and strapped into it when it starts sinking. So we have all the safety stuff except for the seat belts, and we haven't gone slow that fast yet. So that's what it looks like when it's all installed. You can see we added little structural supports to hold the seats in place, and it just looks really good in this picture. I really like this. I believe this was 2 days before we took it out on our first run. And there's Will doing a little bit of uh, control system. So this is our trim bar. It doesn't lock in or do anything. You just push it all the way forward or all the way back or medium, and it kind of sits there because it's so tight. And essentially, this is a big lever. And then it's got a small little piece underneath. It rotates around the seat mounts, and then it uses a cable that comes all the way back, and it adjusts the up-down motion on this impeller. So after that, we installed the steering wheel with a quick detach so that we could get in and out. There's our throttle, which is shoe shaped. We cut that out of aluminum using some of the scraps. We have our on switch, our start button, or this is our main power switch, our start button. This one controls the MSD. This one controls the lighting for the backlights, and I believe this one is the alternator. We've checked. It says tack, but it used to control the tack, but now it controls the alternator. And the rest of these gauges are just so we can know what's going on with the engine, except for this big emergency button. The rules require that you have an emergency cutoff button that stops all electricity flowing in the boat and is operable while seated by both passengers, or by the driver and the passenger. So this was all very important. We wanted to know the oil temperature, how many volts we were running, oil pressure. Oil pressure is probably the most important thing because if you lose that, you blow up the engine or you seize the engine. Then water temperature for the coolant and the tack. So as soon as we did that, we took it out on the water for a test run. So we ran by the old farm and where my mom lives, and we took a couple of pictures, glamour shots, and went to the private lake that we know. We invited a bunch of family and friends out there. You can see we had the seat belts set up, but we didn't use them because, like I said, it was probably more dangerous to have them on than to not, especially at the low speeds. Now, took a couple of videos, and they tell a story if you pay attention. So, uh, here I'm just gonna show you. So that was Will getting it started outside of the water. The starter that we originally used was too small, so we had to upgrade that. We found that out. We had to pull the boat out every single time because there's no clutch. The starter has to move water to start the engine as well, so we had to get an upgraded racing performance starter. So that was me and Will cruising around, just having a good old time, getting it through its trials, making sure that it was stable in turns and on acceleration. And as we went out, we basically turned that corner really fast, and the coolant system blew up on my back. It spewed boiling water all over my back, and it did this a couple of times. We tried to retry, and retighten it down, but it, as soon as it would come up to temperature, the pressure would spike and it would blow coolant water all over us. Mostly me, the passenger. So I would immediately kill it, and like I said, we couldn't start back in the water, so we had to row back, and that's what's going on here. Is we're making our way back to shore so we can pull it out, try to fix it, and restart it. So we learned a couple of lessons. The big one was the coolant leak. It would spray out all over us because we're essentially using the stock coolant loop, just exchanging the radiator for a heat exchanger, a water to water heat exchanger. A couple of our gauges also didn't work, so we had to return them and get them replaced. We also noticed that if you decelerated from a high speed, it would porpoise, so it would bounce the nose up and down, and it seemed like it was an unstable characteristic in that axis for the boat. Uh, it also did it at higher speeds. We also noticed that if it ever slowed down, the wake would catch up to the boat and flood it from behind. We almost sank. We also noticed a bunch of leaks. So we solved uh, we solved the leaks by just sealing them up with silicone or gasket maker. We solved the coolant system by ordering. We rerouted it slightly so that the steam vent didn't route into it. It has its own catch can. The steam vent is so that all the air bubbles that form in the highest part of the engine get blown out, so that there's no air pockets in it, which causes hot spots and detonation. And we figured out that that was what was causing the pressure spikes in the coolant system, was that it was routed incorrectly. And we reinforced the coolant system with turbo clamps and stainless steel tubing. We also added a spoiler to the back so that we could so that we would prevent the wake from catching up to us and flooding us. So those were the big problems that we found out and how we solved them for our first time out. So this is me just continuing the roll cage. So we had to make, they call them like shovels on the corners so that if you ever roll and hit the ground in sprint boat racing, which happens all the time, it doesn't dig in and make contact with the driver, it stops the ground from coming through because it's usually soft dirt. It's spongy. We also made an X in the back to keep the engine from coming forward, and that also gets mounted to the engine mounts. So that prevents the engine, if it were to ever come loose, from ever making contact with the driver. This upper members also reinforce the top section. We also primed and painted the roll cage to make it look really good. I wanted it to be bright and loud and fast, so we went with a really loud, sparkly purple that I put a bunch of pearl in, and Will knows how to paint, so he did a really good job with that. And that's what the boat looked like the second time we took it out. Probably took it out a week later. We installed a windshield because the wind was really bad in our eyes. Uh, we weren't going to go fast, and we knew that, so we didn't install the seatbelts this time. We also installed a battery box so that it wasn't sliding around. So that completely encapsulated it. Is entirely unable to move. And then you can see the spoiler in the back, and it comes up to about halfway up the engine, so the wake never actually makes it to us. And that's Will riding around in it. Uh, now, this was because we also found out that the oil was getting really hot. We had an oil temperature sensor, and it was getting very, very hot. So, in order to prevent cooking the oil, we did the exact same thing as the water cooler, where water is pumped from the impeller through the water cooler or the water heat exchanger, and then out the left side, or out the right side, and then out the left side. We have the exact same thing with a heat exchanger, but this time instead of water to water for the coolant system, it's water to oil for the oil system in the engine, and that just comes out this side. And you get a really good look at the spoiler, and I really like this picture because it just shows off how awesome the boat looks and how it sits. This is also the picture that I used to calculate the exact weight of the boat. I originally anticipated it being about 1,700 pounds, but 200 pounds disappeared from when it went to SolidWorks to real life, and the water line is much lower. I was anticipating for it to be just below this line right here, but it's actually much, much lower. And this is just us working on it. This was fairly recently. And it's it's coming along very nicely. We've still got a couple of other problems. It hasn't burnt anybody since. It has uh, porpoising problems now. So we're about to install some trim tabs to prevent it from porpoising, which again is when the bow rocks, and that happens at higher speeds as well as when you slow down. So we would like to get rid of that instability. But it's coming along very nicely, and hopefully it will be a very safe boat when it's all said and done. So thank you very much.